So Sustainability Podcast Episode 2, produced in collaboration with Singapore Polytechnic School of Business and Sustainable Finance Institute of Asia. I'm your host, Sherry, and we have Stephanie, Collaborations and Coalitions Senior Associate from Sustainable Finance Institute Asia, and a very special guest, Tim Colyer, Head of Financial Services for Southeast Asia from Oliver Wyman. Welcome to Singapore Polytechnic and this podcast.
Thank you for having us here.
Thank you. Okay, so in today's episode, we'll be diving into the realm of sustainable finance with our guest, Timothy. And first and foremost, could I get Timothy to please introduce yourself and your role at Oliver Wyman?
Thank you, Sherry. So again, thank you very much for having me on the show. Happy to be here. So my name is Tim. I'm a partner with Oliver Wyman. We are a global management consulting firm. So our business, we're in the business of advising financial institutions and real economy companies on their strategies. One of the key ones being what they do about climate change and sustainability. So my role is I kind of lead our work with our major clients in Singapore and across the region around how they respond to climate change, how they adopt more sustainable strategies.
Okay, thank you for your introduction. So coming back to Stephanie, I understand that you have been working with School of Business and also our ECG counselors team to bring about sustainable finance industry awareness sessions to our students over the last 2 years.
Yes, indeed. So SFIA has collaborated with SP School of Business and the ECG team to share more about the industry and through talks and inviting experts from the various fields, such as Tim, to share their knowledge. And these sessions have been very well received.
Okay, so to set the context, what is sustainable finance and why is it important to Singapore?
Well, according to the Monetary Authority of Singapore's definition, sustainable finance is the practice of integrating environmental, social, and governance (ESG) criteria into financial services to bring about sustainable development outcomes, including mitigating and adapting to the adverse effects of climate change. It is important because the financial sector plays a critical role in the net zero transition. We need more funding, not just for new green activities, but also for transition activities. This means channeling financing to decarbonize power generation and other aspects of our economy, be it to buildings or transport, and that is the way the world can move towards the sustainability agenda.
Okay, so let's get to know more about sustainable finance. So from a broader overview, Timothy, could you share what are the key principles and frameworks of sustainable finance and how does it differ from traditional finance practices?
Yeah, okay, happy to. So maybe just to reiterate, I'm going to reiterate some of the things that Stephanie was saying about how important green finance and sustainable finance is. So I think what the world has realized over the last 10 years is not only is climate change a really important issue that we need to address, but it's enormously expensive to do that. It requires a lot of investment, and that investment is way beyond the capacity of governments to do alone. So over the last really kind of 5 or 6 years especially, there's been a concerted effort globally to try and enlist the owners of capital, financial institutions, to the mission of addressing climate change and putting money towards sustainability. So when you read institutions like the International Energy Agency say we need something like 4 trillion a year spent on sustainability, that needs to come from the private sector. The private sector is going to do that through sustainable finance. So then, how do we get that amount of money going to the right places? Well, firstly, we put money towards green technologies. So things like solar panels, things like electric vehicles, things like wind power. We need that at scale. And secondly, we put money towards companies that have a plan to green themselves. So money to green and money to greening. And we have different regulatory frameworks and approaches for all of those. I think the third thing that we have seen financial institutions do in the last few years is that they've said, that's not really enough, not enough for us to make a commitment to be putting money towards green. We want to say that all of our business is going to be aligned with a path towards net zero. So we're going to look at everything that we lend to, everything that we invest in, and we'll make sure that that's decarbonising in line with a path towards net zero by 2050, in line with a temperature goal, so that we know that we're contributing in aggregate enough. And that's called net zero alignment or target setting as well. So really it's money to greening, and aligning the portfolios towards net zero.
Okay, so what role do regulatory frameworks and government policies play in promoting sustainable finance in Singapore?
Yeah. So when we've got that idea, we're going to put money to green, we're going to put money to greening. The next obvious question is, well, what is green? And what is enough greening to qualify? And that's where the regulators and the regulatory frameworks come in. So the first, one of the most important developments was development of what's called a taxonomy. So taxonomy sounds like a very boring thing with lots of definitions of animals and things, kind of evokes Darwinian images. But in sustainable finance, what it says is, when I invest in a solar panel, that's green. When I invest in wind, that's green. When I invest in gas, it's probably not, depending on exactly the taxonomy. So the EU was probably the first part of the world to come up with a taxonomy. They have a pretty comprehensive one. It's one of the ones that is most often referenced. In Asia, there's a Singapore Asia taxonomy which defines what it means to be green in Singapore. There is an ASEAN level taxonomy which defines what it means to be green in the region. There are also now emerging regulatory standards around what it means for a company to be greening enough. So at the ASEAN level, Sophia and Oliver Wyman have been collaborating with the ASEAN Capital Markets Forum on some work around transition finance guidance. And what that does is it looks to set out for real economy companies what kind of transition plan would be greening enough that financial institutions can invest in. And then there's a whole load more, right? So that's kind of just the tip of the iceberg. So after that, there's what can we do to decommission coal-fired power plants? There's what are the right standards around the target setting? There's how should we think about risk to financial institutions? So really just kind of a plethora of regulatory frameworks, one which is fast evolving, but one which is really important to channeling the money to the right places.
Understand that. So maybe as a follow-up, how does Oliver Wyman assist clients in navigating these regulations?
Yeah, so we've been kind of involved all the way through this. So we worked kind of initially with the UN back in 2017 to think through how is climate change going to work with financial institutions. We looked at some of the risks of climate change directly to financial institutions, kind of the other side of this equation. And one of the first things that came out of that was the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. So this is an initiative that asked financial institutions to report how is climate change going to affect you, what are you doing about it, what are you governing, how are you governing it. We have since then worked both with financial institutions themselves, but also with some of the industry bodies that bring them together to help to define some of the standards and to help to set additional targets and strategies. So in particular, we worked very closely with the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, a group that was put together in 2021 to try and set some of the standards for what financial institutions should be doing to be aligning their portfolios. And then in Singapore, I mentioned some of the work that we've been doing with Sophia on the transition finance guidance. Also very proud of the work that we've done with some of the financial institutions here. So in Singapore, all three of the local banks have set net zero targets. They've got quite ambitious strategies. I actually think humbly in Singapore we're at the lead in terms of countries and taking climate change very seriously, and we're proud of our involvement in that as well.
That sounds like a plethora of things under your care. So maybe from your experience, how has the landscape of sustainable finance evolved in Singapore? You know that it kind of grew only over the last, say, 5 to 6 years. So how has it evolved over the past few years from your experience?
It's very fast evolving, this, and I think the financial sector reflects what's going on with sustainability in the real world and in the policy spheres, is how I put it. So 5-6 years ago, I think sustainability, ESG, and CSR were to some extent interchangeable. And where we were in the world at the time was, we want to do something about climate change, and we know it's going to be pretty expensive. We're not entirely sure that it's our responsibility. So what you saw were corporate and social responsibility, CSR initiatives, and that largely meant volunteering, relatively piecemeal investments, things that were aimed at doing good for the world and aimed at PR, but didn't really affect the core of the financial institution business. Then as we had the development of taxonomies and the desire to put more money into sustainability, financial institutions have come out with targets for how many dollars they want to put towards green. Greening and targets, it was in the green category. And what we've seen over the last few years is consistently financial institutions set targets, exceed them well ahead of schedule, and set higher targets, which is pretty encouraging. So again, all three of the local banks in Singapore have had that experience, and it's not just that everybody is fighting, but actually the demand for green finance is pretty high, and they can do more than they thought they could do. And then we've seen, really starting 2021, 22, this move into, this is not as an issue which we put $50 billion towards. This is an issue which should be integral to the whole of our strategy, and that led to the setting of net zero targets, changing the whole of the corporate banking strategy, to the point where we are now, where I think financial institutions by and large are seeing sustainability as a business driver. They see this as a mega trend, something where their clients are investing, somewhere where they can make money, and they're just going after the money. And we should all be very happy about that, because it's no longer a goodwill gesture which is piecemeal. This is now something which is in everybody's interest and is wholesale.
We understand that MAS and SGX are doing a lot in this space right now. So what are some examples of sustainable finance initiatives and projects in Singapore?
Yeah. So concretely what this translates into is, by and large, green loans and bonds, and then sustainability-linked loans and bonds. So the green ones, there's lots of examples of these, but banks would lend to the development of a solar farm or a wind farm. UOB, for instance, has a program they call U-Solar, where they will support companies to install solar panels. They have providers, they'll provide the loan to install the solar panel. The second category is things called sustainability-linked loans or sustainability-linked bonds. And what those do is they say, you as a company want to invest in the greening of a particular activity, so I will give you a loan, but the interest rate depends on you achieving certain sustainability targets. So a very recent, quite innovative example of this is one that DBS has recently announced with CDL. CDL is going to commit to some nature conservation targets, and the interest rate on the loan will depend on them hitting those targets. So that's the sort of simple stuff. After that, there's all kinds of innovations that are being kind of invented at the same time. So things like financial structures for phasing out coal-fired power plants early. There's been about 18 months of discussion now around structure in Indonesia. Carbon credits as a way of, again, kind of incentivizing the greening of activity, and much more beyond that.
Are there any opportunities and challenges that these businesses and financial institutions face when incorporating these sustainable finance practices? Many.
So, I think the first challenge that everybody talks about here is data. So I'm a financial institution. If I'm an asset manager, I probably invest in hundreds of thousands of companies. If I'm a bank, I maybe have tens of thousands of clients. A very small minority of those companies really know what their emissions are. So it's difficult to know, am I investing in a green company or not? Does this company, most of those companies don't have plans yet. So how do I invest in a greening company if they don't yet have a plan? I think this. So challenge number one is just where am I right now? Am I investing in the right companies? What do I need to do? Challenge number two is the economics of sustainability are unclear, fast evolving, difficult to keep pace with, and moving in some unpredictable ways. So I think as you go through this, you have to continually refresh what you know in sustainability, because if you're relying on information that's 2 or 3 years out of date, you may have completely the wrong opinion of the sector. So renewable energy was materially more expensive than fossil fuels a few years ago. It's now the cheapest form of energy. If you haven't kept pace with that, you'll have the wrong idea. So financial institutions face a struggle to kind of keep up to pace. But then, as that has happened, the development of renewable energy then creates economic challenges, because not only is it intermittent, meaning it's not available, you can't have solar at night, but also it's intermittent, meaning that you have a surplus of energy during the day. In a traded energy market, that means prices go down during the day. That means the economic models don't work out exactly the way that people expected. So financial institutions are needing to look ahead to things that they haven't yet predicted to work out, is this an investment that they can make or not? And that's difficult in a world where there's not very much data.
Maybe one last question to round up. I understand that the sustainable finance ecosystem has many stakeholders from various industries and sectors, like we've mentioned already. So how important is collaboration between public and private sectors in advancing sustainable finance initiatives? And are there any known examples you've come across that are successful to give us a glimpse of hope?
Yeah, really important is the short answer to that question. And I think there's an increasing realization on both sides of how important the collaboration is. So again, you kind of think about the evolution here. We've had to go from, is climate change a thing at all, to is it man-made? Yes. To do we need to do something about it? Yes. To we need the real economy, we need the financial institutions to come along with the real economy to play their part. To now, yeah, but we can't. Financial institutions are not going to solve this on their own, which is where we're at now. So, I mean, I think some good examples here. The development of taxonomies have largely been a public-private sector collaboration. I think the industry. Think about something like GFANS, which has enabled really every major bank in the world to set net zero targets. I mean, what that means is, in the last 3 years, the entire banking industry has voluntarily signed up to a really strategically important initiative to decarbonize their portfolios. That's pretty astonishing as a public-private sector collaboration. And then where we're at now, things like the discussion around how do we phase out coal-fired power plants in Indonesia early, very difficult, but encouraging that that's happening with a public-private sector collaboration.
It does seem like sustainable finance is a very dynamic and interesting industry to begin with. There are definitely a lot of opportunities for growth in the space. Hence, are there any words of advice to our listeners who might be interested to explore in this area?
I can go first. So I encourage everyone to stay curious, because sustainable finance is a dynamic and evolving field. So approach it with an open mind. During your spare time, you can always educate yourself about sustainable finance principles, frameworks, and best practices. And there are many resources available, such as books, articles, online courses, webinars, and even this podcast. That's why we're filming it. And these can help you to deepen your understanding on the topic. So stay informed about the industry happenings by following publications and news outlets that cover sustainable finance topics. And I can recommend like the Financial Times, Bloomberg Green, Greenbiz, and even Eco-Business. And one way is to sign up for their newsletters as well.
So I would agree. I think there's lots of really excellent things that you can read here. Actually started writing my own blog on LinkedIn this year. And I guess my learnings from that is stay up to date. So if you think you know something, you probably need to refresh and make sure that's true. And then be curious and jump down rabbit holes. So when you read something, you think, okay, well, what is actually really the price of this? And how does the economics of that work? And keep asking those questions and pull up the threads, because you often find there's some really interesting things as you go kind of deeper and deeper down the rabbit holes.
Yes, I agree. Thank you, Timothy, for sharing more about sustainable finance with us, giving us a really solid foundation to start this podcast series. I definitely learned a lot from this conversation, and I'm sure it will be the same for our listeners.
Okay, and that is all we have for today. In our next episode, we'll be touching on another topic of sustainable finance, and of course, there will be a guest to share insights as well. Stay tuned for our next episode of What's So Sustainability, and until next time, remember to invest in a sustainable tomorrow today. Thank you.